I count some of the oldest and most powerful vampires in Skyrim among the members of my court. For centuries we lived here, far from the cares of the world. I offer you my blood. Take it and you will walk as a lion among sheep. Men will tremble at your approach and you will never fear death again.
Vampires in general are a vast race of the most foul and defiled people Tamriel has ever seen. Whether or not a healthy body gets unfortunately infected by another host, the outcome is rather vile, and it leaves people afraid of ever battling the lingering threat of vampirism. The Vampires of Skyrim, or any demographic of vampires at that, have never been the faces of any world-ending dilemmas throughout the timeline of Nirn and its current Kalpa. They've always been enough of a threat to instill subtle yet crippling amounts of fear into the civilizations they inhabit, and this strongly applies to the war-torn state of Skyrim in the 4th era. Hey there everyone, this is Xith, and today we're going to be talking about the state of vampires in Skyrim as of the 4th era, and how the various groups of vampires we encounter in Skyrim have become ever more so vigilant and arrogant in light of the civil war that ravages Skyrim. Vampires rely on discreetness to properly function. They have shaped Skyrim's previously dormant caves and ruins into layers of undead trash. They are considered by many as discreet parasites who'd act upon any instinctual urges that accompanies vampirism, and this would usually include the sweet and almost spicy taste of fresh blood directly from a victim's pulsating jugular vein, alongside the cannibalistic urge to devour the tender meat and suckling bone marrow of one's body. Before we can dissect the nature of the vampires that inhabit Skyrim, I'll quickly elaborate upon the driving reason vampirism in Skyrim even came to substantial fruition. As we all know, the Dawnguard DLC storyline offered us a more insightful perspective into one of the founding societies and factions of pure-blooded vampires, the Volkihar clan of vampires. Pure-blooded vampires are direct products of Molag Bal's vampiric blessing, and the paragons of that subtype were only made pure-blooded by Molag Bal's gift. Now, this only applies to male specimens. Female specimens, however, can only acquire a pure blood status through a carefully executed ritual of rape, which would morph them into a daughter of Cold Harbor. Lord Harkon created a line of pure-blooded vampires and formed a clan in conjunction with his status as Molag Bal's devotee. But as with most strains of pure-blooded vampirism, the Volkihar strain of vampirism enables its host to turn into a vampire lord, something Harkon is very proud of flaunting. Another thing I'm not sure of is if Harkon did indeed bless his court of advisors with his blood, as he does with the last Dragonborn, but what is safe to assume is the fact that anyone bold enough to accept Harkon's gift will surely reap the benefits of what it encompasses. Vampirism itself is more than just an inherited power. It slowly modified itself into a parasitic disease that contains various biological strains which would in turn infect the inflicted individual with the lesser vampiric powers, thus making them lesser vampires. Harkon explicitly avoided the company of lesser vampires, and this was due to their lenient and rebellious nature, which is why we don't realistically see any of them in the Volkihar castle. But what Harkon probably doesn't preach is how most of the leaders of the lesser vampires in Skyrim indirectly derive from the Volkihar clan, being previously infected by members of the clan, which is how Sanguinary Vampirism initially spread and manifested in Skyrim. The progenitors of the Volkihar clan are quite rare cases, and these individuals most definitely don't define the majority of the vampires that live in Skyrim, but it is still worth to credit the Volkihar clan for creating numerous generations of lesser vampires that act as hosts for Sanguinary Vampirism and its pesky strains. Sanguinary Vampirism has been shown and can be experienced in multiple Elder Scrolls games. The term sanguinary loosely generalizes all strains of the disease that appear in other games, that is, except one other vampiric disease called Noxophilic sanguivoria, which is a completely different disease of vampirism altogether. Point is, the prevalent disease of vampirism in Skyrim is sanguinary vampirism, or as it's known in the other games, porphyric hemophilia. all lesser vampires are both carriers and direct owners of the disease's powers, making them effective forerunners for any older and more experienced vampires. Although the negligent feeding of the Volkihar clan members did initiate the rapid growth of lesser vampires, they actively made sure to cull herds of lesser vampires that are present in Skyrim, just so the general populace wouldn't cast a light on the clan itself, because having the general populace hunt them would indeed impede on their quality of life, and privacy is something that Clan Volkihar holds dear. Harkon himself is innately powerful and rode that trait into vampirism as well. He was presumably a king before, and as of the Dawnguard questline, he can be considered the most powerful vampire in Tamriel. But hold on, before you do ready your pitchforks, I'm saying this in complete disregard of the powers that the other vampire clans in Tamriel possess. There are dozens of vampire strains that are probably deadlier than vampire lords. But the reason why I'm comfortably giving that title to Harkon and Clan Volkihar is because of their ambition to enact a world-ending prophecy that would spiral Nirn into a series of apocalypses fit to cripple biological life itself.
Scions of the Night, hear my words. The prophesied time is at last upon us. Soon we will claim dominion over the sun itself, and forge a new realm of eternal darkness.
The Tyranny of the Sun prophecy. This is a prophecy that defines the goals of Harkon but was not explicitly made by him. It goes above and beyond the lesser vampires that inhabit Skyrim's rusty huts and caves, and it signifies the end of pure, innocent, and untouched life. Now, I won't point out how stupid Harkon is for deluding himself that this prophecy will actually achieve anything productive, but what I will do is link you to a video from a fellow Elder Scrolls YouTuber called Avarti, in which he explains why Harkon is in fact dumb and stupid for wanting to do this. Moving on, the Tyranny of the Sun prophecy would extinguish the sun glare of the sun itself, allowing for vampires to freely roam around Tamriel during the day. Luckily for the other members of the clan, this was never fully achieved, for it would have marked the end of the Volkihar clan and most of the vampires in Tamriel. Mortals would have gradually uncovered the mystery behind why the sun instantaneously faded, and this would have also undoubtedly led them back to the well-hidden castle of Volkihar. Although innately powerful, Clan Volkihar isn't powerful enough to withstand the wrath of provincial armies and anyone else that would volunteer to restore the sun. Other, more known lesser vampires have also been indicated as threats in some of Skyrim's holds, although some lesser vampires have been known to suppress their urges and lead fairly normal lives. One of the most consequential lesser vampires in Skyrim is Movarth Piquine, a distinct individual that used to bear the title of a hand-to-hand fighter in the Fighters Guild, but succumbed to the seductive grasp of Sanguinary Vampirism. Movarth was deliberately infected by a priest in disguise, to whom he divulged information regarding his crusades as a vampire hunter. Yes, you heard me right. A vampire hunter turned into the very entity he despised, yet he didn't willingly forfeit his life. Instead, he adopted his new powers to form a coven of vampires in the hold of Hjalmarch. This coven would settle in a lair located north of Morthal, where Movarth would employ the services of his female vampires to seduce Morthal's guards. This seduction would inadvertently soothe the peasants of Morthal into becoming feeding cattle for Movarth and his vampires. The quest that ends in Movarth's demise is called Laid to Rest, in which the involvement of Movarth's apprentices is exposed, and this allowed the people of Morthal to retaliate by marching upon Movarth's entire coven. See, this closely ties into what I was talking before, because the retaliation of Morthal's inhabitants is a perfect example of what transpires after people find out and cast their attention towards vampires who thought that they could confidently use the inhabitants of a given society as chess figurines. It nearly always ends in their eradication. Another interesting character was one of the last remaining specimens of the ancient Falmer race, Archcurate Vurthur. Vurthur was the initial proprietor of the Tyranny of the Sun prophecy, in fact, and he was a devoted disciple of Ariel, who served Ariel's chantry as its archcurate. But he'd soon get infected by an initiate carrying an unspecified strain of Sanguinary Vampirism. The incubation period of sanguinary vampirism is quite silent, meaning that Werther most likely found out about it after its conventionally curable stages. Either that, or Ariel intentionally refused to cure him due to reasons regarding his character. We'll never truly know. Regardless, he kickstarted this prophecy in order to ultimately spite Ariel and its influence over Nirn. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it by no means, but this could have indeed been the decisive blow to Ariel's overall influence as a deity. Yet what Werther failed to realize is that once the disease crosses a certain threshold, not even divine intervention could have aided him in recovering from it. I mean, not even Molag Bal himself can fully cure vampirism. He has to include the help of another Daedric prince, Vermina, to fully revert one's biological state back to its original form. Vampires are usually seen as beasts with involuntary urges that need to be satisfied, but there are a couple of vampires in Skyrim that have adopted the notion of a more logical and independent life. Cerana is a valid example of a vampire living within its means. Her life hasn't been all roses and blood. She unfortunately spent the entirety of her adolescent and adult life locked in a tomb, and yet she still manages to quench the urges of vampirism. Her and Valerica are daughters of Cold Harbor. They were defiled by unseen villainy. They emanate death and affliction, yet they still manage to behave accordingly. Both Cerana and Valerica are insanely knowledgeable. They've educated themselves properly in an attempt to coexist alongside humanity, a trait that isn't exclusive to Volkihar vampires only, but it's rarely ever pursued by lesser vampires. Valerica outright refused to act as a forerunner for the prophecy Harkon was bent on envisioning, and this was due to the existential motives that would ensure the indefinite survival of her kind. Now, moving on to some of the more named lesser vampires. Sybil Stentor, the court wizard of Jarl Elisif, is a Breton vampire who's revered for her magical finesse and profession as a mage. The issue is that no one knows about her true identity, and the hood she wears is great at masking her distinct vampiric features. She also blended into society seemingly smooth, just as anyone else would. Babette from the Dark Brotherhood chapter in Skyrim is also a peculiar case which I adore. Her story follows the exceptional narrative of how she was infected at the unusually young age of 10, and the appearance she displays obviously assists her line of work immensely. What I find unique about Babette is how sanguinary vampirism halted her physical growth, yet heavily contributed to her intelligence and wit. But both of the latter points could just indicate a sign of character traits that were acquired with age, because if you think about it, she could have been present during the Oblivion Crisis as well. Vighar, an elder Nord vampire previously part of an esteemed Nordic family ruling over Falkreath, can also be encountered in a quest given by the former Jarl of Falkreath, Dengir of Stoon. Dengir begs the protagonist to execute his vampiric ancestor who supposedly escaped his grave in Falkreath. Vighar was the leader of a vampiric coven situated in the Bloodlet Throne in the Jarl Mountains. He was initially imprisoned in a grave by his relatives who, for self-evident reasons, decided to lock it. Vighar's escape from his enclosed grave brought him straight back to the Bloodlet Throne, where he's reinstated as the master vampire who controls the fanatical group of lesser and ancient vampires that prey on the inhabitants of Falkreath. There are many more named vampires that terrorize the wilderness of Skyrim, but these are the most prominent ones that have reaped way more than they can sow. The only true enigma out of all of these people is Sybil Stentor. There's such little to elaborate upon when conversing about her character's lore, because for all we know she could be an ancient vampire straight from Harkon's court, but her affinity towards the Throne of Solitude is special. She has seen through the childhood of the former High King Torygg and seemed aggravated by his death. Not all vampires are direct products of Molag Bal, but all of them certainly spread the defiled horrors of vampirism and the toll it takes on society. Certain vampires have learned from their ancestors' reckless mistakes, and they've forwarded the utilization of secrecy and espionage to opportunely create a life of their own personal peace, either through integration or isolation. Skyrim is no different to this equation. But the Volkihar clan, alongside many other vampiric clans that were ended, decided to break centuries of respite by tramping over their own predetermined rules of life on Tamriel. And guess what that warranted? Extinction. That's something to think about, folks. Have a good one.